This is Pretty Much Pop, a culture podcast, sadly lacking the laugh track to tell you that we are funny. Today we're discussing the legacy of cheesy three-camera sitcoms, how today's TV is dealing with that. I'm Mark Linson-Meyer, and a la Three's Company, this podcast has all been a wacky misunderstanding.
My name is Sarahlyn, and I am looking forward to the reboot of Small Wonder.
Wah, wah. Yeah, just you, dog.
Really?
My name is Lawrence Ware, coming from Oklahoma City. And honestly, Mark cussed at me earlier, and I'm kind of getting myself together. It wasn't like bad like yours.
I'm just regretting my actions. Landon, introduce yourself, a long-awaited guest.
I am Landen Celano, doing a pratfall over a bicycle and looking at the camera as my name credit comes up from Grunt Work podcast.
Very well done.
That
Very
is
well
funny.
done.
That's actually funny.
I like
That's
that
a good
one.
job. Yeah, that was good.
So we'd long been in conversation because Josh Casey, Dylan Casey's brother, you go way back with him.
Oh, yeah. I've known Josh for 20-some years now through 3 different states and long friends.
And you have had, for how many years now have you had this Grunt Work podcast almost done, going through in painstaking detail every episode of Home Improvement, plus like other Tim properties and
Wow.
Yeah. It's a practice in folly for sure. We are on our 8th season. I think it's about 6 years now. We're a little more than a recap podcast in that we are, I guess, trying to examine some of the meta messaging of the 90s sitcom through a comedic lens. So Home Improvement is all about male initiation. It's kind of based on this work called Iron John by Robert Bly. And there's a lot of toxic masculinity that came out of the 90s. And so we're kind of looking at it from a 2020 lens and going, well, what do we learn from that? What do we all take away from these Home Improvement episodes, and try to do it with a comic slant to it.
Sarahlyn, I had thought of you. I don't remember why I thought of you among our regulars first to join me on this.
Is it because I'm old?
That's a little bit of a dig there. Like, I have no idea why I thought of you, Sarah. You're a piece of shit, Sarah. Like, God damn, Mark, you're on one today, man.
I was alive during the days when these were the only things on TV. So yes, I could consider myself an expert, I guess, on 80s and 90s.
I thought you had recommended, you had one of the ideas that we were discussing in advance had to do with, was it with the Kevin Can Go F himself, or was that? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So
and you
I
watched it,
that.
right? Did you watch
that.
all both seasons? Yeah. Oh, interesting.
I've sort of gone back and forth into what this show should actually be about. I mean, we've done some coverage of sitcoms on this podcast, but not for a long time, not with any of you people. So I'm happy to go back here. We've talked a little about the evolution from the laugh track 3-camera in front of, performed in front of a live audience, or, whether or not those laughs that you're hearing actually came from that audience or not. And so originally I was like, it seems like there's a few shows that have been kind of deconstructing this recently. So Kevin Can Go F himself, which is what channel? It's an AMC.
Yeah.
So AMC. Not that many people have the AMC channel, but that is a sort of brilliant look at the tropes in sitcoms, specifically family sitcoms. And then this other one, Reboot, recently that I watched,
I love that
which
show
as
so
we were
much.
planning on this,
Reboot is doing something really interesting there. Yeah.
As we were planning on this, they said it's not getting a second season. And the first season was really short too. So that is,
I know, they're shopping around though.
But then as thinking more about this, like, well, those two shows probably are not much audience has really seen those, as opposed to like, well, Night Court just got rebooted. That's hugely popular.
Like
so
11 million.
Yeah.
That 90s show as well.
Yeah, that 90s show was very popular as well. Yeah, it really is.
And Velma is another one that's been rebooted, but it's not a 3-camera.
That's probably, that's its own bag of nonsense.
Yes, yeah. Well.
But Lawrence, when I was pitching this to you as like the cheesy legacy, because just my own self-loathing of like, I sat through so many fucking Welcome Back Kotter episodes and this stuff that I just could not even watch for 2 minutes now without just being physically squirming in my seat and wanting to run away.
Right.
But you seem to have a more favorable attitude towards the, maybe not so much ambivalence.
Yeah, well, I love the sitcom format just as I didn't watch much Welcome Back Kotter. I don't know that show.
Yes, that's probably before your time.
I don't know much about that.
I am the
show.
oldest.
Yeah. But I love sitcoms. But I really, really grew up watching a lot of like black sitcoms, right? So like, gosh, guess what's happening? Guess what's happening now?
Is it actually Guess What's Happening? Or is it Yes. I watched What's Happening.
They also had What's Happening Now, which was the follow-up show to What's Happening, believe it or not. Yeah.
Good Times.
Good Times. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
Good Times.
Love Good Times. Watched Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, of course. Watched Martin in the 90s. Watched Living Single in the 90s. Watched Sister Sister. Like, I watch all that stuff. So I do have an appreciation of the white ones, like the Brady Bunch and the Saved by the Bell, although Saved by the Bell's kind of playing with the form there. I do have an affection for the white ones, but my mom said, yo, nothing else is on TV. After Super Bowl, we watching What's Happening. That's just how I was raised. You can't talk about this stuff in 2023 without having someone bring in some diversity. Otherwise, it'd be just like white people talking about white shit. That's why I'm here. I'm here to diversify.
What you talk about, Lawrence?
Don't start. Do not start with me.
None of our intros had a catchphrase involved.
I know. Yeah.
All right, Landen, open us up here, given all that I spilled out. I mean, it seems like your podcast is not, as you say, just a faithful recap. It's a postmodernist or whatever, however you want to put it.
Your format here on this show, I mean, is it really worth just doing a recap show of something you love unabashedly? To me, that's the most boring thing you can do, is just go into something and say, I love this part and I love this part. I think what we do week to week on our show is kind of look and examine exactly what you're talking about here of like, why was this popular? I mean, Home Improvement was contending for the most popular show on television during some of its time. Why is that? Who was it appealing to? And does it have a lasting effect here 30 years later? I think I'm a little on Lawrence's side here as well, because we talk about this on our show a lot. My co-host is 7 years younger than me. So in a different generation, I grew up with reruns, and Nick at Night. And so I was exposed to basically all of television, whether I was watching the new stuff in primetime, I was watching the old stuff at Nick at Night with my grandparents, or I was watching, the stuff from the 70s during syndication, during the daytime. And so I feel like I have an interesting perspective on the different types of stories that are being told. And what I think is interesting, and I'd like to open up for discussion, is kind of the audiences for these. And Lawrence, you're kind of talking a little bit about that, of why I think these have different appeals for different reasons for different audiences. I think you're going to find some interesting explanations for stuff there.
I do think that there were certainly audiences that were specific. So like Good Times had a specific kind of, it was a black audience, but it was like a urban black audience, if you will. When it comes to Good Times, the Jeffersons also had like a urban kind of black audience for those kinds of shows. The big divide happened in the 90s between Martin and the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, as far as black folks concerned. Because if you were edgy, you were cool with Martin. Like, you liked it. Because Martin was doing some kind of like really envelope pushing kind of comedy. Whereas the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was very, I'm not going to say vanilla, but very safe. I mean, it was funny. It was kind of hip hop, but it wasn't like Fresh Prince is like the Fresh Prince hip hop, whereas Martin is like NWA hip hop. Like, I mean, it's still hip hop, but one has a little bit more of an edge. And the Fresh Prince, your mom could watch that. I would never watch Martin with my mom. It would have been some uncomfortable conversations. But there's different kind of audience for like Friends, or different kind of audience for Welcome Back, Kotter. I've seen a few episodes, not that many. A specific audience for like Three's Company, right? They would find this kind of funny. And so what's going on is, why are there so many different shows? And what audience are they appealing to that kind of keeps going back for those kinds of shows?
Well, what about, there's so much crossover, because so many of the shows that you named, Lawrence, were some of my favorites too. But what makes a show that could be considered a show for one type of audience, such as a Black audience, what makes that like a crossover show? Like, I think of Family Matters as a show that was hugely popular, right? It was sort of across the board. It wasn't just a Black show. It was a show that so many people watched. Or I think of A Different World or The Cosby Show, right? Those shows had huge crossover. But
wait. Did Different World really have? Because Cosby Show certainly.
Oh my God!
Did A Different World
I
really?
watched that religiously. Maybe it was because I was in the age bracket. I was looking up to those women. And I thought, that's who I want to be. I want to be like them when I grow up. And,
Mark, did you watch A Different World?
No, I think I was a little. So when did that start? Late 80s?
It was in the 80s.
It was in the
Yeah.
80s, and I was in high school.
So I was might have been in college. But, you
were smoking cigarettes.
I finished.
Okay, got it.
No. But I finished college. I finished high school in 89. I'm class of 89. So.
Oh, so am I.
Oh, okay. Well, we're.
Well, then obviously, okay. So that's an example. So different world.
I was cognizant of Different World. I probably watched it once or twice, but like it just for whatever reason did not catch me. As opposed to when I was really young, watching just anything, and that's where I watched all that Welcome Back, Kotter and Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie.
Oh
all
my
this
gosh,
stuff that was in syndication.
Bewitched. Oh yes.
So not everything landed or was available. Like I wasn't going to sit through more than 1 or 2 episodes of Mr. Ed. Like that was just like too foreign.
Too far. Yeah.
Well, and you, it sounds like a little bit like, if you graduated in 89, I think there's a big difference too between the family sitcom and the sitcom that's appealing to single life or to people in, just outside of family. And the family stuff is going to be more the like, why in the heck would I watch anything, for more than 2 seconds when I'm in college that is teaching me how to speak to my kids about getting their driver's license or finding marijuana in their sock drawer. Like you're just going to turn up your nose at that. Whereas something maybe like Frasier or Living Single is going to appeal a little bit more to your sensibilities at that time. I mean, if you're even interested in the format and the way that it's trying to deliver, its joke mechanisms.
True. It is an age. It's also a gender thing too. I wonder if the reason why I liked A Different World is because I was a teenager, a teenage girl.
So maybe it is the family comedies that are the thing that is the most scarring. I think before a certain point, there wasn't that distinction.
Wow, scarring.
So that a show like Welcome Back, Kotter, which is ostensibly about high school kids, was something that I was watching, or Three's Company. Three's Company is it's all sex jokes.
It's really edgy. Yeah.
And I was really watching that at age, I don't know, 8. And it seemed like I just thought that the characters were funny. Or funny enough. I don't know. It was enough that like I watched all of them. I watched when they got rid of, it became just like Three's a Crowd or 2. Well, they got rid of, they replaced Chrissy twice. And then eventually they got rid of Janet. And there was one season of just like Jack and his new wife and their father-in-law. And I even watched that crap. So
I didn't go that far down.
Well, that show was on reruns, so we would watch that after school. That show was so not for a kid, but that's what time it was on. That's what we watched before homework.
In terms of appeal, though, I'll say that I loved Three's Company, but I came about it through Nick at Night while going through a breakup in the middle of the night. So just every single night, put on the Ropers and Mr. Furley and just laugh at the completely nonsensical farce that's going on because I don't have to think much. It takes me out of what I was going through at that time. But it bonded me in a way to it that now, 20 years removed from that situation, I can look at it and go, that's pretty ridiculously constructed material, but it provided me the escapism that I needed in the moment. I appreciate it. I did appreciate it for what it was at the time.
Is watching something ironically even really a thing? Or there always has to be for you to, watch it more than once? I don't know. I had a friend in college, one of the summers of college, a friend of mine who later was in my band would watch Saved by the Bell every day. And he was a smart guy and he thought, this is the dumbest goddamn show, but he watched it ironically, or he enjoyed it despite that. Whereas that was the first one. I feel like sitcoms moved to being aimed just at kids, or at least certain ones. Like that's how the format survived. My daughter watched all these Ant Farm and these Nickelodeon aimed at
Disney
kids.
Channel stuff.
Yeah, all that Disney Channel stuff. Hannah Montana, whatever. So that was the first one that I just like, it made my skin crawl just to watch it for a second. And this was my friend watching this. He was like introducing a new way of watching stuff, like hate watching it.
I did that too. I've seen every single episode of Saved by the Bell.
And you hate watch it, Sarah?
I don't know if I totally watched it ironically. I think there was one point where Zach and his girlfriend broke up.
Don't disrespect Saved by the Bell characters. Okay, listen, maybe I was just young. I graduated in 1999. So I did not hate watch a thing with Saved by the Bell. I watched that earnestly. Like, there's a lot of things coming up here that we kind of need to parse out bit by bit. But one of the things that I love were like the very special episodes. So there was one episode of Saved by the Bell. I think they had like a duck or something. And like, it sounds so ridiculous to say this. And the duck like was exposed to like oil. And so the duck died. And it was like a very special episode about taking care of the environment. I cried. I was so teared up. I was so emotionally torn apart by that episode. Go ahead, Landon.
That's such a good example of why I think the family sitcom, one of the purposes I think is you can watch it with your family and have these open discussions about these things. There's an infamous episode of Home Improvement where Randy has a cancer scare. It's supposed to open up this conversation, I think, is the idea with the entire family watching it to be able to go, well, instead of doing the hard parenting, you watch an episode with your kids and go, so, when Brad was hiding that marijuana, that wasn't a good thing. And don't do pot. Okay, great. Glad we had this talk.
This changed my life. I will never do drugs again.
Exactly. I don't think it's very effective, but
it's not effective at all. But I love those very special episodes. And every show has them. I mean, Family Matters had them. Fresh Prince had that genuinely affecting. And it made me cry because I grew up without a father. So it had a genuinely affecting episode where Will's like, why didn't he want me? Like, that cut to the heart. And so those are examples of how these shows can be very, very effective. But at the same time, they're kind of silly and I don't know how serious I should take them. But one of the things that interests me is just where are people watching these shows? So I watched a lot of my shows. I want to say they came on after school. I think that's when Three's Company was on. But I think a lot of people, especially Landon's age, and I have no idea how old Landon is, but since I have gray hair and he doesn't, I'm going to assume. Are we really 40? Are you 40?
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here. You're a great looking 40-year-old. But I think I completely missed that Nick at Night thing. I didn't watch any episodes of anything on Nick at Night. And maybe it was because they were showing a lot of Friends, and I don't really fuck with Friends like that. But maybe that's the reason why. But I didn't watch anything on Nick at Night. Like, by the way, I hate Friends. That's a whole thing with me. We can talk about that if you want to.
I was too old for that.
Yeah, it was a little after my time.
Yeah, it was more like I watched reruns in the afternoon after school.
But then that would roll right into the 7 or 8 o'clock ones. So I can't, in some cases, like I think I watched most of Happy Days at the time, but then Happy Days was also in syndication, so I could see the old episodes, whatever. But it all blurs together now.
Yeah, the Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley hour.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that was heaven.
Wait. So you guys are telling me you watched that like live? Like you watched it when it first came on?
Some of it, yeah.
Wow.
It was on for a long damn time.
Was it? Okay.
I remember the Richie leaving. So I saw it somewhere that must have been a few seasons in that the main character jumped off the show.
Fonzie jumped the shark.
So and since Landon's my same age, I don't know nothing. I mean, I watched Happy Days on reruns. I absolutely didn't watch it on the first run though. Landon, did you? I don't think you were old enough to.
So you say the Laverne and Shirley Happy Days hour, and like I seem to remember in my really young childhood, so this had been, mid 80s, early 80s, that they would recreate those sorts of blocks during daytime television. Like I would go from Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, and then like go eat lunch, and an hour later they'd be playing the Brady Bunch and then Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days. And, that was my babysitter. Obviously that wasn't prime time and wasn't when it was originally broadcast, but I do think that there wasn't a lot of creativity or content to fill the daytime hours when I was growing up. And they filled those with basically rebroadcasting what they were basically live.
Yeah. I remember TGIF, if you guys remember that. It was on ABC. Oh, yeah. They had Family Matters, I think, used to come on during that time. You remember anything else? Was that Full House too? Was it Full House?
Full House, Family Matters.
Could never sit through either of those shows.
No, and that was also, I thought those shows were repugnant. I was like, not
really.
About that. Yes,
we were just too old. This is just a generation. I was too old.
Thing.
It's
okay. Interesting. So like TGIF was ABC. They used to be a sitcom. Thursdays was NBC because I remember ER was on at that time. Is there anything like that happening now? Because a lot of stuff is streaming.
Well, they're bringing a lot of it back. I mean, Abbott Elementary is now.
Yes, Abbott Elementary. That's Wednesday nights. Yes, that's Wednesday nights. I do know that. But they're not.
You don't watch TV like that anymore.
Yeah, we're not.
It's not appointment television.
I just
really,
stream.
Mark, you cut your cord?
Yeah, we just stream everything.
Mark, you are so
But I pay
strange.
for so goddamn many streaming
You
services.
are an old man like legitimate old man, but yet you're so ahead of your time. You're a unicorn. You're a wonderful human being.
Being angered by cable TV charging me for all these channels that you don't ever watch, don't have time to watch, and then not being stingy about the DVR or, having to, if they offer streaming, then it's with commercials or what, like I have no tolerance for any of that.
We need to have a whole conversation.
Probably just as much for all the damn streaming services as I would just for cable. So
we need to have a whole conversation. We can have it after this, whatever, but I'm really flirting with the idea of cutting the cord. I'm really close to it. But I need somebody to walk me and hold my hand and walk me into the beautiful future of cordless life. We'll talk about that later.
Let me try to make this relevant to the topic, which is the only reason some of these stories we're telling of like, I would be home from school and then, well, what's on at 2? What's on at 2:30? What's on at 3? Like that's what determined why we would sit through stuff that is objectively garbage.
But did you know it was bad at the time?
I think I knew that Three's Company was bad at the time. I knew Welcome Back Kotter was a complete cheese factory.
But was it? Okay, Welcome Back Kotter is completely different. I don't know about that show. Three's Company, it is a little corny. I will admit, it is a little corny. The comedy is very of its time, is very corny. And to this day, going back and watching some episodes, because I watched some preparing for this, I kind of enjoyed it.
So as a new thing, like we were rewatching with my daughter, all of Frasier, and like that and Friends. They, I know you hate Friends, but we're not going to get into that.
Just watch Living Single. Go ahead, keep going. Go ahead.
So there's some of those things that I feel like stand up to the test of time, and there's a number of shows even now. So one of the ones I watched recently, I've sort of really thought Chuck Lorre was the devil for a long time, like that he just produced the worst crap on television just based on, what I remembered and then what I subsequently was hearing about 2.5 Men, which is, I think, a show that I kind of enjoyed when it originally came on the air and I watched some episodes, but it was maybe the Three's Company of its time, these sex comedy, wild singles, whatever.
It was pretty edgy.
I just watched the first few episodes of Mom, which is a later one. He did this Allison Janney thing. What an amazing cast. And like,
it's not a very good show.
I think I'm going to keep watching it. But there's no reason that it had to be in that format. Like that exact show. That exact show could just be made into a no laugh track, single camera. In fact, there's a different show that just started this year called Single Drunk Female that I watched a couple episodes on, which seems very similar, but it's in like the more modern, or Shrill is another one of the new ones. Like that's the new style that I can stand. Whereas this, like, I don't know, unless I can actually imagine, like with Friends, that they're actually on a stage in front of people who are honestly laughing at the things.
Right.
If I feel like the laughing is being boosted up electronically or by the hype people that are like showing them the signs when to laugh, it's just weird. It
feels really condescending.
Yes. We had a Aaron Sorkin episode on here, and we talked a little about the comedy Sports Night that had a laugh track in its first season, but it was just like mutters. And then they just got rid of it because like it was deadpan humor and it was done in front of an audience, but they just actually, I guess, used the laughs that were there. And then they're just like, this is embarrassing.
It sounds a little bit like we can talk about format and we can talk about formula. And going to like your Chuck Lorre comment, I'm kind of curious, like, it's what you do with the formula within the format that can make it or break it. And like, why does Frasier work or Cheers work? And why do those stand the test of time? Why does the Golden Girls stand the test of time?
Oh my gosh. I love it.
Because of what it's doing with its formula compared to some of the cheesier stuff, some of the Chuck Lorre stuff that you see the later seasons of 2.5 Men. You just see the formula laid bare and there's nothing being done with it. And so it feels insulting to your intelligence because it's as old as television itself.
Like all those Norman Lear shows,
right?
There's just so many of them. And not every single one of them was a home run, but still, he had such a great average. And all those shows that, you're just talking about the Jeffersons, Maude. God, all of those shows, they were like little stage plays, and they were in front of a live audience. And they didn't feel like they were talked down to the audience either.
Would Norman Lear be able to do those shows if that format and formula didn't exist beforehand for him to kind of subvert and turn it on its side and go in a different direction with it?
Well, he is. And he was coming from, the sitcoms from the 1950s and the 60s, right? With like I Love Lucy and all of that. And he did. You have to reinvent it. That's why Chuck Lorre was so is so successful. I mean, he is extremely popular and not really my thing either, but those numbers he gets for those shows from the early aughts are kind of unmatched in a lot of ways.
I think I've told you this before to your amazement, Lawrence, but after a decade or more of being completely snobby about it, I eventually turned for the second time to try to watch The Big Bang Theory. And now I'm almost done with the show. I've almost gotten through, because it's a show I can watch and not even look at it. I could just listen to it while I'm doing other stuff.
I think that's the key.
I think Landon's right. I think that is the key. Go ahead, Landon.
That sort of sitcom appeals to I think two different types of people. One is the younger generation who they need that laugh track to know when to laugh. They're watching it with their family. They might not get the jokes, but they're falling into the formula. And then the other's I just need something to erase the day that I just had.
And just have it in the background. Yeah.
Joyful
certainly.
In the background, something colorful in the background while I look at my phone or do my dishes that isn't the existential crisis that is the news every day.
It also makes me think of the generational thing is, I don't know about you, Mark, but some of us were latchkey kids. A lot of us were, we have parents who work and, the television for those of us sometimes was our babysitter, and having that companionship in a way, it didn't really matter what was on, but it just so happened that's what was on, those types of sitcoms. And that was kind of our background noise, our company, which maybe makes them so nostalgic now. I mean, I do kind of wonder why we're coming back to some of these old shows and rebooting them.
Yeah, we should turn to that.
That's a whole other kind of conversation. And one that Lawrence was kind of interested in your take, if you've seen the new Fresh Prince. We're talking about changing formats. We're talking about meta. How do we reinvent something going from a 3-camera sitcom into a drama?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that I want to talk about here because I'm fascinated by the Night Court phenomenon because honestly, I kind of didn't like the original Night Court. This one is interesting. It's fine. It has some great acting. There is an art to sitcom acting, and Night Court has it in spades. But the new Fresh Prince is interesting. The character's name is Will, and it keeps the formula of the Fresh Prince, but it turns it into almost a Bollywood melodrama. It's really hard to kind of put my finger on what they're doing with that show. But at the same time, I absolutely love what they're doing with that show. I watch it with my family. I mean, it's MA. There's some things that are inappropriate for the young kids. So we'll kick him out the room or something like that if we think something bad is about to happen. But it's a very interesting phenomenon to take this show that was just fluff comedy. You can have it in the background. The famous episodes of Will playing basketball with Carlton and Carlton being absolutely terrible. And the whole offense just give it to Will, let Will cook. And now it's a serious drama. There are some moments of comedy, but it is 90% drama. It is really, really crazy. So I don't know why that show is so successful, but people love it. They love it. If you go on social media, whenever the episodes premiere, everyone that I know is talking about it. So this brings me full circle to the issue. I do not know what's going on. I don't know how they're doing what they're doing. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what shows they choose to turn into dramas and what shows they choose to remain comedies. I imagine that they would never do a dramatic Martin because I don't know how that would work, right? If you know anything about Martin, it's in Detroit. It would be like a gangster show. I don't know how they would do that, but I'm fascinated by what they're doing now with all these shows because they're bringing some back. They're making some of them dramas. They're keeping some of them comedies. And I have no idea what the formula is. I don't know what works and what doesn't. But obviously, the Bel Air is working. The Night Court is working. Other things don't work so well. I don't love a 90s show, for example.
Have you seen the updated Saved by the Bell?
I did watch that. Well, I watched the first season of it, and it lost me on the second season.
I like the first season of the reboot. I actually did like it.
It's still a laugh track 3-camera sitcom?
No.
Oh, it's not.
It's a single
different.
Cam.
Yeah, it's single cam. There's no laugh track.
No laugh track.
It is a comedy. I read it as more of a dramedy than a hardcore comedy, though. Because it's there's just serious stuff they're kind of dealing with that's happening in the periphery. There's commentary that's happening about socioeconomic class and bringing people from a lower socioeconomic class into like a higher socioeconomic class. It's a different kind of show, which the first season worked for me. The second season, not so much.
So Night Court, which is one that was in, I think, that Thursday block that it was maybe after Seinfeld or whatever. So I watched that religiously as a kid. And I remember...
Was it good? Did you like it?
I liked it enough to keep watching it.
The older version is much better than the newer version. I've watched a few of the old version. The thing that I keep coming back to is I'm like, that show just didn't seem very special to me. It was fine, but it just didn't seem special. I'm thinking, why would you bring that back? Why would you bring that particular show back and then bring it back in a way that's not particularly, you're not reinventing anything here. You know, it's basically the same show.
I think John Larroquette is doing a masterclass on sitcom acting. He is so good. He's almost in his own show by himself every single time he's on the screen. He deserves an Emmy for what he's doing with that show. It is really, really good. The rest of it's fine, but he's on a different planet.
They could have made that into a legal drama, into just, you know, there's no reason, you know, to make it a dramedy. There's so many, yes, or legal dramedy, you know, a comedy with some dramatic elements. I feel like the text of the show of don't be so cynical is like a self-defense of the format and the show itself. Like, it's okay to like something where everybody's mostly just nice to each other and we're just goofing around. And that's what a sitcom should be. And it should be something the whole family can enjoy. And, you know, everything doesn't have to be Euphoria and Breaking Bad.
Isn't that part of the whole strength and weakness of the sitcom format, which is it has to play to the widest common denominator and therefore it can't be too offensive. It has to have the widest and broadest appeal, which when it's working, it can really speak to something timeless and something that we all can relate to. But at its most obnoxious, it's like, okay, this is, you know, a little insulting to my intelligence.
Yeah. But I was just talking about this with my husband. So the old Night Court, every single character had their own kind of quirk. And so Harry Anderson had like magic and he was always fiddling with stuff. And you had the big tall guy who was a softie on the inside, but looked scary on the outside. And the smoking lady and, you know, and John Larroquette, who was kind of a lech. And, you know, it was just everybody had their own thing going. Whereas you don't in the new version, you don't have anybody who really kind of stands out as someone with a particular characteristic or anything. It just seems like such a waste of talent.
I feel like you're being a little hard on the show there, Sarah. I mean, clearly something is working because so many people, I'm not talking about an HBO millions. I'm talking about like serious 11 million, 10 million. Like, this is a huge show. That's the issue. I don't know why. I do not have the answer for you. I don't know, but it's filling some kind of hole. And John Larroquette is really, really good. And I think that it's fine. I mean, the first episode was a little bit of like place setting. So it wasn't like as funny as the later episode. Because the first episode was like, we have to justify why we're going, like what's going on, why we're back, all the kind of stuff. And then it kind of got going. I didn't watch the first Night Court. That was not my thing. I might have been too young for it. I don't know. Now, it's not Abbott Elementary. Abbott Elementary is great.
And Abbott Elementary could have been shot as a 3-camera format, I think.
It could have, yeah. It's more in line like a mockumentary kind of show. So
sure.
I think that the format that it's playing with, very much like The Office, very indebted to that. I think that the format is part of what makes Abbott Elementary so funny because like there are times where characters are looking at the camera deadpan and it works. I mean, so I prefer Abbott Elementary the way that it goes. You have to pay attention. But Night Court is a show that you have on in the background though. I would be shocked if the millions of people who are watching Night Court are like sitting down, taking notes, like paying attention, drawing lines between how the characters are relationship. It's a background show. And I think that's part of the reason why it's successful. People just have it on the background while they're cooking dinner or doing whatever. It's a little risky. Like there's a male stripper, it's a little risky here and there, but it's something you have on the background. And that thing is the strength of that show and why it's so popular.
That's another like trope of the sitcom too, which I think separates it from the meta sitcom or the meta shows that we're seeing, which is things had to return to a status quo by the end of the episode. There wasn't really a continuing storyline. There was, a continuation of character, but there really wasn't any stakes on the line for these sitcom episodes. So it made it more difficult to explore the things that we can do in something like Kevin Can Fuck Himself. something where like King of Queens could not do, right? And I think that kind of plays into what I've already said about the comfort level of these shows. Is like, we know no matter what happens, no matter what strife happens between these characters, they're going to be fine at the end, unless somebody's leaving the show.
You can drop in at any time too, whether you don't have to have seen the pilot episode. You can come in season 2, episode 4 and get it. It's fine.
Like, I remember with Blackish, when that was kind of churning and doing very well, there was like a stretch of episodes where they were like, the mother and the father were like having issues in the marriage, and there was like a threat that they might break up. But we knew that was bullshit. We knew they weren't going to break up. There is no way that they're going to break that show up and somebody's going to leave, right? And so that's what you want. Like, you want a show, there might be a little tension the last 3 or 4 episodes, but ultimately it needs to resolve. It needs to kind of restore our hope in humanity and in the world. And that's the makings of a great sitcom. You start messing with that formula, then that sitcom is going to end very quickly. You can't have Saved by the Bell and then Kelly dies in a shootout in the parking lot of a Bel Air. Like, it can't be that way.
They did that on Kevin Can Wait, didn't they? Like, after one season, they killed his wife off and they brought back Leah Remini. It was like, okay, let's just do King of Queens again.
You can do that to reset things, but you can't really mess with the format too much, because if you start messing with that format, like, imagine the Brady Bunch and one of the kids like dies. That is traumatic. You're not watching that shit.
Well, I watched the 2.5 Men episode with Ashton Kutcher where they had severed ties with Charlie Sheen. I just couldn't get my head around like that. They didn't care. The audience knew what was going on. We're not going to like pretend that this is sad in the way that they do when when Phil Hartman died. And I was watching news radio, and they have to, and they did that in Night Court too, that like a couple cast members, a couple bailiffs in a row, I think, died because they were really these old ladies, and they would make a show of the people in the show being sad about it. It's not like Wakanda Forever where they had to stretch it out that long, but at least they would give.
Don't be careful with what, be careful about Wakanda Forever. Don't start talking shit about my movie, man. Don't talk shit, man.
Maybe it's those Norman Lear ones, like where you actually could have tragic things happen. The dad on Good Times can just die, like, because that actor didn't want to be on anymore.
I mean, but that's the actor wanting to leave the show, but they found a way to do it in a way to like continue the story. Like, you can't go too far though. Like, if there's contractual stuff going on behind the scenes and the person wants to leave the show, you can find a way to have the person exit the show. But you can't, like, in the first season, the 10th episode of that first season, kill a kid and expect people to want to come back. Like, you have to be gentle and be knowledgeable about how you handle those kinds of things.
A lot of those shows, those Norman Lear shows, were such a product of the time because they didn't shy away from those big issues. Whereas they weren't tackling those kinds of issues, in the 90s.
Like on Full House, didn't people die? Wasn't it a full enough house that people could die off? I never watched that show, but
hell no. They would never.
The whole mission statement for that show is what happened to predictability. So I don't think that they were going to be killing anyone off on that show. But Sarahlyn, that's an interesting point where maybe the sitcom could be revitalized on a grand scale now if we did take more chances like they took in the Norman Lear shows, reflecting the times that they were in. I feel like the sitcom now is so clean and so like, let's just make it as inoffensive as possible. What was that episode of All in the Family where Gene Stapleton gets, and it was like not played for laughs. And that was shocking that they had a sitcom where there isn't a laugh a minute. And you would not see that now, but maybe that's what we got, the jolt of the system that we need to bring that sitcom back to life now.
I do not know how you do a police brutality episode of a sitcom, or how you do a Me Too episode of a sitcom today. Like, maybe I'm just too narrow and I'm not thinking broadly enough, but I remember that episode and I remember the episode being shocking, but I can't imagine them doing that today. And maybe that's just like the format has changed so much that they can't go back to it. I don't know if they could.
I wonder if you just can't do it in that 3-camera setup in front of a studio audience. Like, you have to do something like Kevin Can F Himself, where you're looking at gender and you're looking at a wife who has finally has some agency over herself, over her life, and seeing that true arc, that true character arc in her journey in that show. But you couldn't do that. And I think that's what that show actually was all about. When it was in the 3-camera sitcom format, it was all about this baby man and his, narcissistic viewpoint.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about the ideology? So Landen, you get into this. Like, we've been talking a lot about just the experience of there being a laugh track, or like, is it a single camera? Is it not a single camera? But, the thing that seems objectionable about a lot of these in retrospect is the ham-handed, that if they're doing something that's not just sex comedy, just Three's Company, whatever, then it's like those very special episodes of what you talk about,
Saved
Willis.
by the Bell or whatever.
Say about the Bell.
Yeah.
Different Strokes. This is what I was raised on.
Yeah.
Where
Different
a friend of Arnold's gets touched in a bad way, or all these drugs episodes, something wrong going on there.
Kind of picking up the pieces of all these things we've been talking about, the status quo that they have to return to by the end of the episode, the laugh track. These things kind of contribute to a normalization of what they are tackling as an issue in an episode. And when you're dealing with something like on Home Improvement, it's constantly the battle of the sexes. And that often presents itself between Tim and Jill, his wife. And if you're not paying close attention, the way that the writers will construct the show is they'll have the conflict and then they'll resolve it by the end. And it's usually, adhering to Tim's side of things, or like he doesn't learn too much, but we have to return to the happy marriage at the end. But they cover it up with a laugh track. And so when we walk away from the episode, we're kind of like reinforcing these conservative beliefs and viewpoints, even if they aren't intending to do so. It's just by the nature of the repetitious format and formula. By the end of like season 3, we're like, okay, guys are going to just be guys and they don't ever want to go to the opera. And too bad she's going to have to do all the dishes and cook raise 3 boys, cook all the meals and go to school. But he loves his cars. And what are you going to do?
Wow. That is dark. I think one of the, I've never watched Home Improvement, but if what that show is about, wow.
Maybe I have 8 seasons of, cynicism behind me with that, but there
still,
is a certain look behind the veil,
If it's like 10% of what you said, that is dark, man.
So you found that Kevin was actually like a pretty spot on response to that.
I mean, it's taken to its extreme degree, but I think that we need a jostle to take a deeper look at what's happening with what we were brought up on. Because we just had an episode recently where the boys who are now, in their late teens were going through something, and I was the same age as they were. And I took away, maybe not directly from that episode, but they were touching on something in the culture at that time, and they were playing it for laughs. I think it was like one of these things that we see like in How I Met Your Mother. These like, if you want to get in bed with a girl, you got to do just listen to her and say these 3 things and, you'll get there eventually. That's all they want to hear. And they're playing it for like laughs and the boys don't succeed at it. But the message I took away was, well, there are a set of rules to do these things. And that's how I lived my teenage years. And so looking back on it with 20 years of perspective, I just can look at it and go, wow, this schematic was there. And it was being reinforced by presenting it as something humorous without really examining it deeper. Not that you can in a sitcom at that time, right? I mean, that's kind of why I think Kevin Kneff himself is needed to kind of have an extreme look at those archetypes.
That is so interesting, Landen. The laugh track as being our guide to how we're supposed to be understanding the narrative, right? Even though there are alternative ways to understand a narrative, obviously, right? I wonder if a show like Kevin Kneff himself, if the only reason why it can exist is because we have been retrained as viewers to go into something knowing that there can be nuance and texture to a character. Like many of us have seen The Sopranos and we understand, and we have seen shows that are just as deep and wonderful since. And we are reprogrammed now to be able to make up our own minds about these different characters. And so coming back to something like Kevin Kneff himself is a totally different viewing experience for us now. Like we wouldn't be able to have viewed that show 20 or 25 years ago in the same way.
I'm feeling like I should have at least tried to watch the How I Met Your Father once to see how that one continued. Because How I Met Your Mother was one of those things you're referring to, Landon, where actually I watched that with my wife for most of its run. But at a certain point, I know that the Barney character and his misogyny is supposed to be played for laughs, that he's really, a gay guy in real life and is not the sleaze bag, but like it was just too much. And that was another one. The cast is great in that, but I remember Jason Segel making a joke toward the end of the run of like, oh, I wonder if next season Marshall will come back and eat a big sandwich. Like that the format, those writers or whatever, had trapped him in something that, even though it was a pretty good example of his genre, please let it end at some point.
You can apply it to like any show. I mean, if you start to really look underneath it, and Lawrence, trigger warning here. If you look at Friends, like Ross
Here we go.
Ross is like a toxic dude, and it played for these kind of romantic tropes and for these big, broad moments. It's all building to that end of the season finale where they play U2 over him and Rachel getting together. But when you really examine, what does he do? What are we learning from this? What are we taking away subconsciously, because we aren't actively pulling it apart while we're watching it? What are we taking away? And it ends up being like, you just need to be persistent. You just need to
wear her down.
Exactly. And, you could do that with Seinfeld. You could do that with Frasier. You could do that with literally anything, because the sitcom format and the formula just is designed to kind of graze the top of the surface of these things.
Yeah, of course, Seinfeld or Married with Children or, these things that were reacting at the time to the sitcom format. Like, we're going to keep the sitcom format, but everybody's going to be shitty to each other or what, whatever.
Married with Children. Oh, that was a great show. A great show.
I think I hated it when it came out. It was just,
really?
There are certain things like, I don't know, when I first got introduced to Howard Stern and people are yelling at each other and I'm just like, this makes me viscerally uncomfortable. Eventually I adjusted and like, okay, I see the appeal of this. But yeah, that's never one that I spent enough time with to get over the hump.
I feel that way a little bit about It's Always Sunny, where it's like I can deal with it in small doses, but like it gives me anxiety to binge a season. And I'm just like, can we just all not yell at each other for, 5 seconds?
See, I love that show now. And that was, I need to quote my former co-host, Brian Hurt, that Always Sunny in Philadelphia was a smart show about dumb people. And then Big Bang Theory was a dumb show about smart people.
That's
exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have no apologies for Sunny, other than maybe it's been around a little too long. But the Neo Seinfeld, the Larry David's, Curb Your Enthusiasm, like
Curb Your Enthusiasm is different. Though Curb Your Enthusiasm is really, really good, and they just kind of take breaks every now and then, and then come back. But I mean, it's just a formula that works. It's very deadpan. It's very straightforward. And I think they will know when to end it. See, one of the things that sitcoms oftentimes get trapped into is they get trapped into making episodes way long past their time of being good, right? So you'll get like 3 good seasons and then like 5 seasons of crap. And so
much filler.
Yeah, it's a lot of it. And so a sitcom that really knows when to end, they go in with a particular starting point and say, we'll do this for 3 years. We'll do this for at max 4 years. And they stop, right? They don't get seduced by money. They say, we're going to stop here. That's a good sitcom. That's kind of what happened to How I Met Your Mother, is how I felt about it. At the very beginning, it was really good, really intriguing, trying to figure out what was going on. By the last 2 seasons, I was ready for it to end. And then for them to come back with a whole nother show, I'm out. You can't go on too long. And that's when I'm beginning to wonder if Yellowstone will learn that lesson and if Succession will learn that lesson. Don't go on too long. Have a stopping point.
Succession, I think, is learning that lesson. Point. The networks used to order 22 episodes in a season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's a lot. That's a lot of episodes in 1 year, to get through. And I just imagine those writers. Yeah. I mean, and that was a great gig, and those writers were making a living. But at the same time, what are you going to do, especially with characters that don't change?
That's the other thing too. Is when the sitcom first was around, binge culture didn't exist, so there's a certain amount of repetition. Like I think Golden Girls is one of the best written shows maybe ever.
Absolutely loved it.
But
loved it.
I tried to binge it, and even I was like, okay, Rose, I don't want to hear about St. Olaf again. Like every episode, you hear the same jokes because we're watching it week to week. You had breaks between, you had a summer between seasons. And so you could have a more tolerant palate for that.
It's a really good point, man.
Well,
yeah, and you didn't have to have a catchphrase, or you could have a
Dynamite.
Dynamite. What you talking about, Willis?
What you talking about, Willis?
Right. Isn't Dynamite one of the things that drove the dad off the show of Good Times? Because he was kind of a more hoity-toity actor, a real actor. And he's just like, this is becoming like a farce. And I'm getting upstaged by this jackass. So I'm going to leave the show.
Yeah. But I have a question. Did other people, other than black people, have catchphrases? Because there's what you're talking about, Willis. There's Dynamite. Did I do that? Like, that's Urkel. Like, did white people have catchphrases? Or was that just a black people thing?
Every show had a catchphrase.
Did they?
How you doing?
Who's that? Who was that? Who was that?
There you go.
See, that's Joey on Friends, but that's not every episode. That's just like a recurring gag.
Okay.
Nobody had catchphrases that they would do every episode.
I didn't
The
watch
Simpsons, which was another one of those things, so The Simpsons deserves its own episode at some point, but like this was introduced as something like Seinfeld that was going to be subversive. But it's existed so long that like, I don't know anybody that still watches it that watched it at the beginning. So I don't even know what to say about it. But
there's Bang Zoom to the Moon, Alice.
Going back to the honeymooners.
What is that?
Like,
is that from the 50s? What is that?
That he would threaten his wife with domestic
violence.
violence every episode. Yes.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
Is that funny? Is that funny?
No.
Is that a catchphrase?
No, it's
or
not
is that
funny.
a threat? Is that a threat? I feel like
it was both. It was a
threat-
it's
catchphrase
both.
and
It's
a threat,
both.
apparently.
Yabba dabba do. We don't have things like the Flintstones that were not subversive versions
that's
of,
a whole
of
nother
sitcoms,
episode.
but-
Because now we're
but
talking about cartoons,
ripping
the
off
Jetsons. Yeah.
making children's versions of
And
these
it still
things.
had a laugh track, right? Didn't Flintstones
Oh, yes.
have
I
a
want
That-
to say it did. That's a good point. That's a great point. It absolutely did.
Norm from Cheers? Every time he walked in, that was
Okay. So
Wasn't
it
his
wasn't just the black
catchphrase.
characters. It wasn't just the black characters, but
You got it,
maybe.
dude.
Oh yeah, that's Full
Full
House.
House.
Yeah, that was funny. You got it, dude. Anyway, I definitely wouldn't remember anything on fucking Friends though. I'll tell you that shit.
Let's do one more go around. Is there anything, a show or anything that you were like, oh man, we really should have talked more about this? Or
we touched a little bit on it, but I'm interested in how things evolve from when they were first seeded as an idea to what they currently are. And I like seeing the like slow progression of these things. So going from the family sitcom into things that slightly subverted it, like Norm and Lear, Married with Children, The Simpsons kind of subverted
everybody
that.
loves Raymond. Like the fact that like there's kids, but the show's not about the kids. Like that was in the opening.
Right. Yeah. And then going into something like The Office where there's a format shift, but it's taking the sitcom formula kind of with it and then going from that and how it translates into what we see now. And you kind of see these parallel branches going where you see the evolution of how we're playing and turning the formula, but then getting things like Last Man Standing and Big Bang Theory that are saying tried and true. And what does that say? And, I think that kind of comes back around to the main question that we started this with. That's kind of where I'm interested in. It's like, what are the audience for those things? What are they taking from them?
Lawrence, any final thoughts? Any shows that you didn't get to mention?
I mean, there's plenty of stuff. I would love to talk more about living single and how living single is really what Friends was trying to be and what they ripped off on. And that's the reason why I fucking hate Friends, because they stole Living Single and turned it into a white show and then like kicked all the black people off of the studio, even though they were in New York and allegedly there should be black. Anyway, so Living Single, I'm really interested in the current shows. Like, so Southside is a show that's on HBO Max. It's really, really good. And it's kind of a new sitcom, but it's very black and very interesting. There's also Brooklyn Misdemeanor that's on Showtime. I believe it was just canceled though. But that's an example of a contemporary, like, new show that's kind of a sitcom, but doing something interesting. So sitcoms are still around, but they're doing things differently. They're playing with the format, and I'm really interested to see what they do in the next few years, particularly when you have a show like Night Court that is very much traditional, and you have other shows that are doing different things. We'll see what happens.
Nothing much new to add other than I'm appreciative of any show that tries to kind of play with our expectations and twist it in some way. We didn't talk about BoJack Horseman, but I loved that he was a sitcom star in a garbage show. And that, I like anything that kind of, that plays with that plays with what we think we're getting ourselves into. And I wish that we had actually talked a little bit more about Reboot. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that somebody will pick that show up.
I don't think
it was just announced that they aren't moving forward.
Yeah, they're not.
Not just on Hulu, but nowhere.
Yeah,
it's on nowhere.
Okay.
I know Hulu didn't pick it back up, but
those people are too much in demand by other things. Like, unless you got them under contract, you're not going to keep that cast together. That
show's moving on.
Well, there are things like that, like Freaks and Geeks, that were a little flash in a pan, but yeah, they will live forever in streaming as just show. Like, a thing that happened once when amazingly they got this cast together, and now nobody could afford
way
them now.
Too good to continue that. Like, that was an amazing show. Everybody who's listening, send Sarahlyn hugs. She's sad about the end of her favorite show. She needs some love. Like, if you guys could see her face, she was just dejected when she heard that the show was going to end. Send her love. We're with you, Sarah. We stand with you.
Thanks, Lawrence.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Landen. Thanks to all of you.
Thanks, Landen.
Thanks, Landen.
It's great to be here. I've been listening to all your voices for so long, and glad that I can finally be part of it.
Awesome. Thanks, listeners. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.